Hello everyone, today we're going to take a look at Yooka-Replaylee, a remaster of the 2017 Yooka-Laylee, which was a 3D platformer game made by key old-school Rare employees that worked on games like Banjo-Kazooie and Donkey Kong Country. We'll compare the original to the remaster, which I have here for PC. We'll look at high-end PC, low-end PC, Steam Deck, 1440p all the way to 8K, and Nvidia versus AMD GPU performance, because surprisingly there was quite a bit of a difference. I'd like to thank keymailer for giving me an early review copy of the game, which has allowed me to spend quite a bit of time before the release of the game, which is out now for $30 on Steam. Pretty good price, I think. Now, I wouldn't call Yooka-Replaylee a remaster. I'd say that it's a lot more of a remake, as you're going to get to see. You let me know what you think in the comments. But I have a limited run physical copy of the original game here for the Nintendo Switch, which came with a pretty nice physical instruction manual, like in the good old 3D platforming days that many of us grew up with. Now, speaking of which, when I heard that key Rare developers formed a studio to develop a new 3D platforming game back in 2017, I was really excited and looking forward to Yooka-Laylee. But I remember when I played the original game, the controls and the camera, the movement was actually kind of atrocious. I felt the pace of the game was a bit off, with a few puzzles sprinkled here and there. I played it for a while, but it just didn't really do it for me. Now, when I heard that this remaster aims to address all the issues that I and many people had with the original game, I was really looking forward to checking it out. And the pacing is much better. You don't need to run around and slowly purchase new abilities. You get all of that from the start. The controls, which is extremely important for a game like this, feels 1,000 times better. So does the camera. In the original, I would fall off ledges, not make my jumps, and I'm a pretty decently experienced 3D platforming player. I like the genre. Now, the visuals are beautiful, colorful, and up to date with what you would expect for a game like this. All in-game textures have been completely redone, which is why I consider this to be more of a remake, but they've also added new features. You now have a map with points of interest, fast travel points. The game feels more alive and interesting, and the pacing is much improved, like I said. Many of the puzzles have also been improved, with a lot more new content added in as well. Like in this first map, for example, this area in the original, it's empty. But in the remake, they've added a whole new section with a Shovel Knight themed platforming quest, which revolves around red gems, of course. Basically, the entire game has been rearranged to be more interesting and packed with things to do. Additionally, and very importantly, all of the soundtrack in the remaster has been arranged by the Prague Philharmonic Orchestra. Take a listen. As you guys can hopefully see, this isn't your run-of-the-mill remaster, and why I consider it to be more of a remake. You have fully from the ground up remade sound, textures, added content. It's great in that regard, but as far as the technical side of things and the overall PC port, it is rather lacking. For example, you don't have FSR, DLSS, or any form of resolution scaling to use as a tool to gain more performance. Although the game isn't particularly demanding, you don't really have access to individual graphical settings either. What you do have access to is something more of a graphical preset, beginning with the very low graphical preset, to low graphical preset, to medium graphical preset, to high graphical preset, very high graphical preset, and the Ultra preset, which is what I've been using for the footage that I've been showing to you guys. As I mentioned earlier, the game isn't particularly demanding on Nvidia GPUs anyway. For example, here we're running the game at native 4K ultra graphical preset on my RTX 5060, one of the cheapest Nvidia GPUs that you can currently buy, paired with a Zen 2 8-core, 6-year-old Ryzen 3700X, and we're well above 60 FPS. So 5060 doing extremely well here. It's a type of PC you could put together for around $600 to $700 brand new. So in that regard, it does pretty well. Performance, if you run with an uncapped frame rate, of course, can vary depending on the area. For example, areas with a lot of grass and foliage and trees might be a little bit more demanding than, say, areas that don't really have much of that in the background. But still, overall, performance is great on the RTX 5060. Now, if we switch over to the RX 9060 XT, the overall performance, it's a lot worse than the RTX 5060. First of all, you might notice that the game appears to be having some stuttering issues here and there. Now, this isn't the 9060 XT's fault. There is some shader compilation stutter whenever you enter a new area that you've never been into, but once you play for like a minute or two, it all goes away, as you're gonna get to see. But there is a very big difference in performance here that is quite unusual from other games that I've seen. Now, I know that the first game ran on the Unity engine. I'm not 100% sure. I think this one does as well, but I'm not 100% sure. But either way, there is clearly a big difference between Nvidia and AMD in this game, because the 9060 XT is a noticeably more powerful GPU than the RTX 5060 on average. If we switch over to a more high-end PC build here with my RTX 4090 and Ryzen 9800X 3D at 4K Ultra, you're gonna get an extremely high refresh rate experience, especially if you have one of the new 4K 240Hz OLED displays, which is what I've been using to play the game primarily on, and you'll be able to more or less max your display out. If you run with an uncapped frame rate, of course, you will be pulling a lot of power. Your GPU will run maxed out, especially if you have a very capable CPU as well. As you can see here, the RTX 4090 is pulling 450 watts. So it's nice that this game can actually max out the GPU to run at its full TDP, something that you don't normally see with Unreal Engine 5 games. But yeah, it's pretty crazy. Very fluid gameplay experience. Although in my opinion, it's a bit too much. Personally, the way I've been playing the game for my own personal enjoyment was with a 120 Hz, 120 FPS frame rate cap. And as you can see here, I mean, the RTX 4090 only running at about 40%. The PC is running much cooler, and for me at least, 120 frames per second locked is perfectly fine, and I'm perfectly happy with that. Now, it is worth mentioning that while the game doesn't support very popular PC features like DLSS and FSR and resolution scaling, things like that, or graphical settings for that matter, it does actually have support for ultra-wide aspect ratio. And I've been playing it on my ultra-wide OLED display as well, 3440 by 1440, and it looks fantastic. I think the ultra-wide aspect ratio for a game like this works really well in my opinion. I think all PC ports of games these days should support ultra-wide, and there's some that don't, which is disappointing. So I figured I'd mention that at least 21:9 aspect ratio is supported. I didn't test any more extreme ultra-wide aspect ratios, so that is good. With the 4090, we have plenty of power in the tank that we could try to go for an 8K resolution. So what I did here, I don't have an 8K display, but I just used the Nvidia app to force an 8K resolution, and it is actually very possible. I ended up setting a 60 FPS lock, so 8K 60 Ultra, that is native of course, there's no upscaling in the game, and it is very possible with the RTX 4090. Downsampling from 8K to 4K resolution does improve the anti-aliasing a bit, although at a massive performance cost. Personally, I don't really feel that it is worth it. I think the game looks perfectly fine at native 4K. So I just wanted to test it out for you guys and show you that it is possible to do 8K 60. So while the PC port itself may not have any resolution upscaling technologies to gain extra performance, you'll have to rely on adjusting graphical presets. And if we use the 9070 XT as an example here at 4K, unfortunately dropping from ultra to very high to high, performance gains aren't really all that noticeable, but dropping to medium, it is rather substantial. So short of dropping the resolution target, this is really the only way to gain some extra performance. But I would say overall, the PC port itself is pretty good. The Steam Deck version of the game, on the other hand, though, is pretty interesting because it's unlike anything that I've seen before. It seems to be a native Steam Deck port of the game, or the developers have focused to make it a version for the Steam Deck, because if you go into the graphical settings while you run the game on the Steam Deck, there is no graphical settings that you can adjust, nor is there any resolution options either. It runs for the Steam Deck. There appears to be a 45 frame per second cap on the game, and I'm using the OLED version of the Steam Deck, which has a 90 Hz display, so maybe that's why it's running at half the refresh rate. But I've never seen this before in a game where it's not like it's a port of the, or it's running the PC version of the game where you still have access to the graphical options. No, not in this version of the game. It's capped at 45 and you can't really change that. And if you're looking at the GPU metrics and CPU metrics on screen, it appears that we do at least have the GPU power to be able to run at a higher frame rate if we wanted to, but we don't seem to be able to do that. So interestingly, I don't think I've seen this before in any other Steam Deck versions of a game. Normally you have access to the same settings that you do on PC. All in all though, it does run relatively smoothly. Again, just like on PC, there is some stuttering that can happen when you first enter an area for the very first time, but after playing for a little while, it settles down and it runs pretty smoothly, as you can see on the screen. And 45 frames per second feels okay. Feels fine on a handheld, and it obviously isn't running the ultra graphical preset, but it does look pretty nice. I mean, if we look at the grassy fields, the view distance is pretty decent. It's fine. I don't really have any issue with it. I could see myself playing the game through the entire thing on the Steam Deck on the go, and I have probably put in a couple hours on the Steam Deck, and it's been fine. To summarize my experience with Yooka-Replaylee, it's a huge improvement over the original. I personally found the original to be a bit disappointing. Primarily it was because of the controls and the camera, something very important for any platforming game, but especially a 3D platforming game. It was quite atrocious. It was straight out of the Nintendo 64 days, which I think is what they were aiming for, but I don't think that really turned out to be a wise decision because that was fixed with the remaster. Additionally, the worlds also felt a bit lacking on the original. There wasn't all that much content. The remaster addresses all that. According to the developer, the content in the maps has doubled. With new features and collectibles, updated graphics, sound, it's a perfect time to give it a try. If you've never played the original, or if you played the original like me and found it a bit disappointing, I think at $30, what you get is totally worth it if you're into these type of games. It's some good old wholesome 3D platforming fun. I do wish the PC version had FSR, DLSS, and frame generation. I think it's very reasonable to expect that these days. While the game isn't particularly demanding, for whatever reason it does underperform on AMD GPUs clearly. I only looked at RDNA 4. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough time to also look at RDNA 3 and 2. I'd imagine things probably look similar between Team Red versus Green. But that's it. Leave your comments down below. Let me know. Give the video a like if you liked it. Consider subscribing for more content. And thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace.